Thousands protest on college campuses as one of the world's most advanced militaries launches a relentless bombing campaign on civilians, with the US election just months away. You think I'm talking about Israel's war on Palestine's Gaza, right? Wrong. This describes the public response to the Vietnam War, in which the US was directly involved for 18 years, fighting primarily against the Viet Cong guerrilla forces in the south of the country. Many have raised parallels between the US's war in the 1960s and Israel's war on Gaza today. Here are 3 similarities. Student protests calling for a ceasefire in Gaza at dozens of American universities have rocked the United States. Hundreds of demonstrators have been arrested in the biggest student mobilization since the 1960s protests against the Vietnam War. In fact, the last time Columbia University management called the police to arrest students was during the protests of April 1968, where over 700 were detained. Rallies spread across the country, and 4 students at Kent State University were killed by the National Guard in 1970 while protesting against their university's ties with American defense companies. Just like today, response to the protests was divided, with most of the American public disapproving of student demonstrations against the war and considering the students as the source of the violence. Since October 7th, some analysts have compared Hamas's cross-border operation to the Tet Offensive of the Viet Cong. In late January 1968, Viet Cong guerrillas and the Army of North Vietnam broke a ceasefire, launching a massive attack across cities and provinces of South Vietnam. The attack was timed to coincide with the Vietnamese Lunar New Year festival, when many South Vietnamese forces were on leave. But the US and its allies rallied, and by the time the main assault ended 2 months later, the attackers had suffered enormous casualties without gaining any territory. In military terms, the operation was a total failure. However, the real achievement of the offensive was the shockwaves it sent through American society. Military propaganda had presented the US as winning the war, but the scale and audacity of the offensive said otherwise, forcing the US strategy to be re-evaluated and prompting many to doubt the war effort. Hamas's October 7th operation also caught Israeli forces unawares and was a shock to Israel, who had thought Hamas members incapable of such an attack. While Israel had been pursuing normalization agreements with neighboring Arab countries, the war has put the Israeli occupation of Palestine back on the international agenda, and even brought Israel to the International Court of Justice for its alleged violations of international law. The Tet Offensive, like Hamas's operation, took place in the run-up to a US election under an incumbent Democratic president. But US President Lyndon Johnson's failure to quell protests was only worsened by the footage coming out of Vietnam. Unlike in previous conflicts, Vietnam was the first televised war, bringing the scenes of devastation to the screens of the American public. This image of a Vietnamese girl suffering from burns on her body won the Pulitzer Prize in 1973. The footage of the conflict added strength to the anti-war movement, resulting in the defeat of Johnson in the 1968 election and the success of Republican rival Richard Nixon. Today, similar images from Gaza have gained international recognition for capturing the brutality of Israel's bombardments. Social media has also played a disproportionate role in the war, allowing citizen journalists on the ground in Gaza to reach international audiences and showcase the destruction and bloodshed firsthand. History redeemed those campaigning for the end of the Vietnam War, with historians later considering the US's intervention as a military and political disaster. Yet the war had far-reaching consequences on American society and on the election. Will Israel's war on Gaza have the same impact?